Okay, let me just start sharing my screen. Okay, I hope everyone can see what is on my desktop. Now today, I wanted us to have the formal introduction to the course unit research methods and essentially look at the basic concepts of research and hopefully look at, should I say that this would be they try to have a general understanding of what research is and some of the elements that you really must keep in mind as we carry out our research. Now, at the end of this lecture, we won't only look at the basic concepts, but I'll also introduce you to the most common research methods or research strategies that exists within research. So these lecture slides are already on Moodle. Yeah, you may have had access to them already. They've been there for quite some time, but let's go through them now. So we first begin with what is research? What does the term research mean? And if any of you has gone ahead and looked at materials, you'll find what you see on the slide here is quite common, where we refer to research as a systematic inquiry. Number one, note the key terms systematic and the key term inquiry. Those are key terms that we need to keep note of. Systematic means that you have a logical, essentially with the understanding that I would bring forward, you have a logical flow of an inquiry into a problem. It's logic, it is scientific. It is not hearsay, it is not what we believe. It is an inquiry into an unknown to bring forward new knowledge. Two, it is an inquiry. When we had the discussion, our first discussion of especially Saturday, when we talked about a research question, that essentially we begin with a research problem, then under research question. The key point is that this question leads you to inquire, to make an inquiry. And when you're going out to carry out your research, you're making an inquiry. We don't go out to find out what we already know. If we do that, then that is not research. It should be an inquiry. As we stated last Saturday, a key point to note is that this inquiry must not only be unknown to you, but also to a research community. So you're going out armed with scientific methods, a scientific approach, and you make an inquiry. Now, once you make that inquiry, to make that inquiry, you use what we refer to as research methods. Okay, research methods. This is a core point of research, to have those research methods, and those research methods are what we then refer to, are what makes our research scientific. Any method, we've encountered methods before in mathematics, those who have done physics or chemistry, whatever it is, we've encountered methods. And that research is like any scientific field, research has research methods, which essentially bring the scientific side. So one, the research method ensures that we are answering our question properly. And two, that we are being as objective as possible. The method allows us to arrive at the correct answer. Take an example of mathematics. You have formulas, mathematical formulas. I'm not a mathematician, but maybe there are some of you who may be mathematicians. But we know 1 + 1 = 2. 1 + 1 cannot equal 3 or 5 or 7, no matter how much we wish it to be. But the research, that research method should allow us to discover something that was relatively unknown to you and to the research community. So in other words, there must not be a preconceived answer. The answer must be discovered, and the research method allows us to objectively seek the answer. Now, the important point of making this inquiry is that we must also make a report about it. Now, the report is normally done through a dissertation, but what normally in the research community, what essentially we should do is publish our data, our results. They should be published, and therefore that others may see this is what was discovered. Many times, most of us just do our research to finish the dissertation and get our master's degree. That is fine, that is also okay, but if you have the opportunity to go ahead and publish, please go ahead and do so. So research is concerned with seeking solutions to problems or answers to meaningful questions. Now, seeking solutions to problems. Now, this can be a little bit misleading when you read it. That is the first thing I want to point out. This statement can seem a little bit misleading. What do I mean? Say you have a headache. The solutions are quite varied. They may tell you drink water or take paracetamol, and your headache will go away. Others may say, okay, no, first find out the cause of the problem. It may be you're getting sick. You may have maybe a malaria infection, bacterial infection. Sort out that infection, and then you'll solve the situation, the headache. This is a different kind. Normally, we assume that is the issue. And for IT, this can be a little bit misleading if we look at it that way. Why? Many times in IT, we encounter problems like, oh, there's this organization that is doing things manually, and therefore we must automate, and therefore the solution is build a system. Okay? Okay, yet for definitely, automated systems can bring about solutions into a situation where an organization has manual processes and systems, but that is not a research problem. Okay, that is an organizational problem. It's not a research problem. So the key point here is to find research problems, and those research problems should be phrased in a meaningful question. Yeah, it should be able to be phrased into a meaningful question. The last Saturday we met, last weekend, we had a discussion on that, on a research question. And I hinted something. I remember there was a question from somebody, can't remember who it was, but there was a question about what if I do my research and I reach halfway and I realize I've hit a dead end. Then the point is that your question was not meaningful. So, food for thought. One of the things I would like you to do on your own, just do research on what is a meaningful research question or a good research question. Just go and Google it. If you can find some articles on it, well and good. It will be very helpful to build your knowledge base for the next topics that we're going to discuss after this weekend. So you must have a meaningful research question, a question that is a little bit complex, not too complex, a question that doesn't give you a yes or no answer, but a question which goes out to seek and understand and then report back to a research community. So find out what a meaningful research question is. So here we have just a brief, this one is just simply expounds on what I've discussed earlier. The thing we want to avoid are non-meaningful research questions. That is the thing we want to avoid, because that is exactly what will bring about a dead end in your research, and we don't want that. So key points to note is the definition of what research is. Endeavor to understand it, and this should really be ingrained in you. Why? It is important if you want to have a good dissertation, really, really good dissertation, that even you yourself, you will get up and say, yes, I appreciate this. Bear in mind the scientific side of it. Don't simply go to get up to carry out a topic simply because this is easy, I already know the answer, and therefore I can make my conclusions very well. Or simply don't come out to do a dissertation rushing to write the book. Sometimes you get the sense of that, and it's understandable that this is one of the things I want to put forward. When you're doing your degree, be it bachelor's, master's, whatever it is, you are anxious to finish. That is the key point. You're anxious to finish. I remember it happened when I was doing my master's. It happened as well when I was doing my PhD. I wanted to finish. And I remember in all the prayers I said, I begged God, please. I even tried to bribe God in other ways. I tried to say, okay, if you're not doing it for me, you do it for the supervisor. He's suffering, eh? You know, something like that. But the whole point is you want to finish. That is the whole point. You just want to finish. But it may, in that process, you will compromise. You'll compromise on the inquiry process itself, where you're seeking to know. Yes, we are in a position where we want to finish. One of the thoughts I can give you on this is start now. Start making your inquiries now. Don't wait until it's time for you to, for the university to tell you, okay, now we've given you a supervisor. Now the research workshop has come in. Now you've been given a supervisor. Start now. Start making your inquiries now. Start familiarizing yourself with a research problem and a researchable area. Start now, and then once you familiarize yourself with it, the job of your supervisor then is simply to guide you to articulate your inquiry better. Yes? Articulate your research problem better, articulate your research questions and objectives better, but start now. We all want to finish and graduate with everyone else, but give meaning to your research. A third point, the second point we looked at was meaningful research question. That will be the core of our next lecture. So I urge you, start reading on what is a meaningful research question. You can start by going to Google, just type in what is a meaningful research question or a good research question. And you'll find some really good content out there. Then now, should I say the encompassing part, what will cover the basic concepts of our research will be these two research approaches or philosophies: positivism and this is phenomenalism. We shall discuss this in detail in the coming slides. At the end of today's lecture, we want to understand some of these basics. Research philosophy, we've begun with one of them. We've talked about some of them. Positivism and phenomenology. approaches to research, which basically is connected to the philosophy, strategy, or rather the methods, a multi-method approach, credibility of research findings, and ethics of research design. Then we shall conclude with a summary of what we have discussed. Now, one of the most important things we need to understand is the different approaches. These two approaches, positivism and phenomenology, these two that you see here, these are, should I say, the parents. If you've been in ICT and you've done programming, especially objective-oriented programming, what's up the parent and child situation? Should I say that these two approaches basically produce or dictate all other things that you will do in your research? You will find there are others, there will be other discussion, there will be other, should I say, research approaches, but the most common is the positivism and phenomenology. These are the most common. So this is the first that we're going to discuss, the research philosophy. Now, when we are talking about the research philosophy, the first thing I want to emphasize is a philosophy is not usually explicitly stated while you're doing research, but it is something that remains in the back of your mind as you carry out your research. So in other words, we don't expect that as you're writing your dissertation to say, my research is a positivist, takes a positivist philosophical standing or phenomenology. No, but it will be at the back of your mind and it will shine through in everything that you do. Like all philosophies in life. I mean, most of you'd hear some people say, what is your, I remember there was a time when people used to ask that question, what is your philosophy in life? And it is something that if you asked me, I don't think I would know how to articulate it or spell it out. But we can see people's philosophies in life in the actions that they do. There are people who are really family oriented, for example, and you see it in everything that they do. Whatever they do, they refer back to their family. They refer back to their father, their mother, their grandfather. Someone will insist, before I do something, let me check with my wife, let me check with my siblings, let me check with that. That is somebody who is really family oriented. Then there are people who are really career driven, where you see somebody who endeavors to gain qualifications, who seeks for job opportunities that are in line with their career. Somebody is not just looking for a job that brings a paycheck home, but they're insisting on building a career. That you see that the person may not state it explicitly, but you see it in their actions, the value they may have towards their job and the principles they hold while at work and while at home. Things that you see philosophies like that. Now, it's the same thing in research. What we're going to discuss, you won't state it explicitly, but it will drive your research. Now, the most common philosophical positions, as I stated, are positivism and phenomenology. Yeah, these are the most common. Now, there are others, but these are not common, like critical realism and pragmatism. These are not common. You can go ahead and read about them on your own, but they are not very, very common. What are these philosophies? What are they? And how do they differ? Number one, it's logic. We have already talked about research, what research is, and we said it is a systematic inquiry. Now, that inquiry obviously follows a certain logic. Yeah, there is a logic that inquiry is following, and that is what the philosophy drives. What is the logic? How are you going to seek how are you going to answer your question? what will be the reasoning behind your conclusions? How will you come to your conclusion, for example? Here is just a simple example. Somebody might say, we've had, there's been talk, especially during the lockdown, that there were a lot of school girls who got pregnant during the two-year lockdown, since during since the pandemic broke out and government imposed a 2-year lockdown on the education sector. So we've had a lot of pregnant girls, and different researchers may approach this differently. Somebody may decide to take a statistical look and say, before, let's say from 2017 to 2019, how many school-going girls were found pregnant? And from 2020, from 29, okay, it started from 2020. From 2020 to 2022, how many school-going girls got pregnant? And from that, makes a conclusion. They'll say, based on the numbers, maybe we found there was an equivalent number of girls, and they'll make a conclusion that no, the lockdown didn't bring about an increase in number. The numbers were still the same as then and now. Or if they found something differing, there were more pregnant girls from 2020 to 2022, then they'll make a conclusion that yes, it is true. There were the lockdown most likely did increase the opportunities for girls to get pregnant. That is one way of thinking. Another person will say, for me, I'm going to take a different approach. For me, I'm going to find out. I'm going to make an inquiry. I'm going to go to a number of these girls who are pregnant. I sit down with them and I discuss, I find out. I try to understand the situation surrounding them, maybe how they got pregnant, who do they stay with, and so on and so forth. Who is it that impregnated them, and so on and so forth. So that person is taking a different approach. So in all of this, it is the reasoning behind everything is different. But then again, also it depends on what your research question is. It also dictates what logic you're going to follow. There's also the question of ethics. Both approaches have differing ethical principles. But basically, ethics is determining what is right and what is wrong, the study of right and wrong. And again, everything has its, people have their different ways of arguing it out, of thinking about things. I'll give you an example. We have certain tribes in Uganda that carry out female genital mutilation, or what some may refer to as female circumcision. And we all know laws have been enacted which have declared these practices illegal. And I'm sure there have also been workshops and sensitizations and so on and so forth. But however, one of the things that has been observed is that women themselves, or even mothers themselves, take their young children to these traditional practices. They actually take them through these processes, which have been criminalized. And even there was actually a documentary I saw of an adult woman who was not circumcised, but at her adult age, she made a decision to be circumcised. So she took herself there. So there are questions that arise. I remember one time when I was doing my bachelor's degree, when a gender class, and I remember one gentleman raised his hand and said that I think these women enjoy it. Eh? And I remember as ladies in the class, we were so mad, we almost, I think if we had guns, we would have shot this man. But however, making that conclusion based on numbers of saying, oh, this number of mothers take their children there, or seeing the number of women that go back, to say that they enjoy it is a bit is a bit ignorant, should I say. Someone may say, let me use statistical numbers to see how many do it, and then maybe I make that conclusion. But in terms of ethics, that wouldn't answer the question, because if you've seen documentaries, the female circumcision is really brutal, and in some cases can even basically disfigures somebody. It's dehumanizing, and it causes long-term pain. In some situations, it can even end someone's life. But however, to understand why women go back, most likely somebody has to take a different approach. Most likely somebody needs to sit down and understand why these women do it, why a mother would take her young daughter there, why an adult woman would take herself back to such a brutal act. So an approach, the ethical approach, should I say, there would be important. Your research, you should also ask yourself in your research, what would be the ethical approach in me trying to ask this question? Would it be fair for me to do a survey, or would it be fair for me to sit down and talk to people? So that is where the ethics comes in. Are you seeking to understand, or are you seeking to draw a conclusion? What is it you're trying to do? The philosophies also differ on epistemology, how we know. That goes back to the ethical part. Would it be easier for me to use statistics to know something, or would it be easier to know something by sitting down and studying it and spending time with people? So those are questions that you need to ask yourself as you're carrying out what you're studying. Then ontology, that's the other part that also differs. We are trying to find out, so let me move this. We are trying to find out, we're trying to see the reality in which the phenomena, or what is it we're studying, the reality in which it sits. If this is a reality that is foreign to us, then we may need to maybe spend more time with that reality. If it's a reality that we know about, many people have studied it and they have a clear understanding of it, then maybe it's better to look at the statistics then, that is rather than go and trying to understand by speaking to people directly. Do we have any questions so far on these aspects of philosophical approaches? Any question? Okay. If at any point there's something that doesn't make sense or I'm moving too fast, please stop me. Now let us move to the actual philosophies. Let me see here. There's something, isn't it? Okay. Let's move to the first generic philosophical approach, which is positivist approach. Now, this approach is normally referred to as, if you've heard of quantitative or qualitative research, this approach is normally referred to as quantitative in nature. It deals with numbers. When we are dealing with numbers, or it deals with positive facts. Yeah, positive facts. Something that is observable. For example, if we were to try and find out the statistics of the Faculty of Science, and specifically the Department of Computer Science, do we know what gender profiles we normally attract? Is it more male or female? Then age group. We might also look at the career profile. Those are positive facts that we can attain from you. We can also look at maybe salary scale. That's another thing. What salary scale is normally attracted for this course unit. You know, things like that. Those are positive, observable phenomena. Sometimes the argument is that this is the most scientific method. Yeah. What do I mean? Science sometimes tends to look at things that are observable. Take an example. I see a chair before me, therefore that chair exists. There are some things that I may not be able to see them, I may not be able, I cannot refer to them. To a point, yes, it is true, but to another point, no, it is not true. In certain circumstances, it is true, but other circumstances, it's not true. There are certain things that are underlying that we may not necessarily see. I'll give an example. There was a research that was done in the field of ICT that is ICT for development, and it dealt with a village. And in this village, the researchers, or they had started a project where they wanted to improve information access for farmers, or information delivery. And specifically, they were looking at broadcasting market prices for specific agricultural products for farmers. So for example, let me just give an example, maybe market prices on matoke, market prices on maybe maize, things like that. And so they started a radio station, a community radio station, and they didn't just stop it at that, but they also, they were not just broadcasting on radio, but they also installed a sound system throughout the village using these loudspeakers, where they broadcast the information periodically on market prices for the different agricultural products. Now, like all projects, they came to evaluate, the donors came to evaluate the project after a certain period. And when they came, I think they found at the radio station, the young lady who had been employed, she had given up the job. The loudspeakers that had been installed in the community had been vandalized. And so they did the first set of the evaluation, they had a positivist approach. So they just made an inquiry, or like, why was this thing removed? Why were the loudspeakers removed? And people said, oh, there are bad elements in the community, and they vandalized these loudspeakers. But however, when they decided to take a qualitative approach, they found underlying issues that you definitely couldn't find, you couldn't pick up from a questionnaire or from surface inquiry. Primarily, they found that these community members were not I mean, like all human beings, if I look at you as a human, each one of you as individuals, if let's say you're a farmer, you don't want your entire life spent on talking about farming. You don't want every working minute of your life to be told about market prices. You have a life, there are other interests that you have. And they found out that these very community members got fed up of constantly hearing market prices, and they vandalized these things. They got fed up. And their argument was that, why can't you also broadcast things like our favorite soaps? Our favorite soaps on TV that we watch. There are those who like Telemundo, these drama series and so on and so forth. They say, you give us updates on those as well. Don't just give us market prices. And you see that bit of information, you couldn't get it just by picking certain data off the surface. But also surface data also reveals quite a number of things. I do some work with Palliative Care Association of Uganda. And one of the reasons I got involved with them was because Palliative Care Association was collecting data, periodic data from certain health facilities on palliative care. And that data that they were collecting, of course, it's quantitative data. Things like morphine use in a particular facility, how much morphine is used daily, on what were the number of patients, what was the illness that required palliative care, and so on and so forth. Now, that data actually revealed that there was a strong relationship between HIV and certain types of cancer. And that led to further inquiry into that relationship to find out why specifically people who were HIV positive that were more prone to this particular type of cancer. So all of them are quite, one of the things we shouldn't be drawn into is to be boxed into a particular type of philosophy. All are good research approaches. It only depends on what inquiry you're making. So that is the positivist approach. Before we go further, is there any question you may have? On positivism? No? Okay, let's move on. The second approach is the phenomenologist or the phenomenalist. When we're looking at a phenomena, when we're experiencing a phenomena that is relatively unknown. Key point to note, positivism normally deals with an area of inquiry which is quite normally heavily known about, something that is quite common and has been researched extensively. This is when positivism comes in. With phenomenology, we normally come in when we know next little or nothing about a certain phenomena. That's why it becomes a phenomena, something that we haven't yet fully understood, or it requires a certain experience. So the experience of one part of a person is required to be able to understand it. One of the, I'll give you the example of the research that I did. The research I did was trying to study the phenomena of an ICT-4D artifact in a rural context. What is it that works? What is it that doesn't work in a rural context? That was, would I say, the rough question I have. What works and what doesn't work in a rural context? What are those variables within the context that will affect either positively or negatively? And my research was basically saying, we don't know. We don't know what exists. Now you can think of any context, even in an organizational context, information systems, how they behave and why they behave in a certain way. There are some things that may not be known, that may not be clearly understood. I downloaded a small research article in the field of IS, and I'm going to upload it on Moodle, which was basically this one was a quantitative. It was using the positivist approach, quantitative approach to look at the ability of these smart technologies, specifically mobile phones, to bring about the feeling of joy, of feeling good or happy, by using these simple things of the touch screen and the smartphone abilities. The fact that I can move my finger on the screen and tap a certain application and so on and so forth. When I come to the WhatsApp application, when I use any application on the smartphone, the feeling that it gives me as a user. And that is the positivist approach. Now, another person could have said, why don't I use the approach of, I approach this as a phenomena or phenomenology. Why don't I use that approach? When I seek to find the experience, I seek to ask people, how do you feel when when you're using the smartphone? How do you feel? Does this give you a good feeling? Are you excited? Are you this or that? But the positivist approach is when somebody, the person is studied, their body posture, their brain waves, what is going on as they are doing something. So that is basically looking at that particular approach. Now, phenomenology, like we said, we study our experience. This is where we may want to sit down with somebody and find out, how do they feel about this thing? The example I gave you of female genital mutilation, where you may want to go and ask adult females who make a decision to go and be circumcised, to find out the experience. What was it that drove somebody to go ahead and go through this excruciatingly painful experience? What is the meaning behind it? What is it that is pushing them? And in that situation, it's only the experience of somebody telling you, what is it that motivated me? This is why I was motivated to go ahead and do this thing. One of the primary reasons phenomenology is used is uniqueness. When you have a unique situation and simply getting surface data will not answer your question. That is one of the first and most important things. Secondly, when you have something that is affected by time, location, and culture. Yeah, time, location, and culture. If those things are going to affect a certain phenomena, then most likely you need to take the phenomenon, you need to be a phenomenalist in your approach. We can think of several examples in that. Like the first example I gave you was female genital mutilation. What is it that would cause a mother to take her child to go through this excruciating pain? What is it that would drive an adult woman to make that decision? What? And only that person can answer it. For example, I can't answer it because it's not part and parcel of my culture. It's not part and parcel of the time in which I live. Think of, let us say, people who lived during the time when kingdoms and chieftaincies existed in Uganda. The political climate was completely different from what it is now. Now in the times of democracy, now in the times of military rules and so on and so forth. The situation is quite different. If you may not have had, let's say, for example, political activists in the times of kingdoms, you wouldn't have those activists. You wouldn't have had human rights activists. You would not have had opposition leaders and political critics and government critics and so on and so forth. Those didn't exist in that space and time. Now, the same thing also goes, a political activist in Africa or in Uganda doesn't experience the same as in the same in the Western world, or in let us say the countries that are extremely religious and take very strong control, or countries that are extremely politically secretive. Now, for example, like North Korea, a political activist doesn't experience the same unique environment, the same environment as that one in Uganda, should I say, or Kenya or any other country. So that kind of research would not rely on a positivist approach. This research is also highly subjective. Yeah, it is highly subjective. Now, this is where sometimes the criticisms come in, especially from the positivist side, that if something is subjective, then it can't be scientific. But that is the whole point when something is unique, when something comes from a unique situation or a unique context. Yeah. A very simple example I can give you is information systems don't behave the same in different contexts. Is that right, true or false? As IS or an ICT, people from an ICT background, information systems will not behave in the same manner in different situations. True or false?
True.
Yes, that is definitely true. There are many variables that differ. There are many things that differ. Even a culture will affect the way a system is used. Subjects from a set, or rather, system users from different cultures behave in different ways and different manners and so on and so forth. So you can't necessarily say that because something is subjective, then it really can't be research. So those are some of the criticisms that may come out from the different promoters of the different approaches. But however, again, one of the things that is important to note, what I would like for all of you to take home from this is, don't go biased by over one opposing side. You can use either of them, and as a researcher, you find yourself using different approaches and sometimes even combining the two. Now, a key point to note in relation to the positivist approach is that normally with the phenomenalists, what you come out at the end with is a narrative, an explanation, while in the quantitative side, what you will have are numbers, figures, a statistical view of something. Yeah. Any question before we move to research approaches?
Yes, Doctor.
Yes, please.
Good evening, Doctor, and the class at large. My question is, under what circumstances may you find yourself combining those two approaches together?
Under what circumstances? Now, yes. Normally, we are going to come to this when we talk about research design. normally you'll find yourself combining them when you're especially trying to do what we call triangulation. What do I mean? I'll give you an example. My research was largely qualitative, meaning I used largely qualitative research methods. But however, at a certain point, to a small extent, I did use a survey and a test paper, yeah, to validate some of my findings on the qualitative side. So, for example, I spent 2 years, 2 years with a rural community. In the 2 years I spent with them, what the activities I did, I went to healthcare workshops. So I sat with them during healthcare workshops and listened to them as they talked about their different challenges. And in this time, I did minimal disruption. That means I just simply let them talk without me asking questions. Then at a certain point, we had a focus group discussion where we asked one generic question and let people discuss. We just had some generic questions and we let people discuss. Then I had one-on-one interview sessions where the things I had picked out from the healthcare workshops and the focus group discussion, I went into detail to try and understand more and more about those things. Now, at the end, when I felt I had picked, then I also brought in an application. I first put in an application, rather designed the first version of the application, and the community gave me feedback. Then I designed the second one, which was brought in, and then I also saw the reaction. Now, from all those, I picked certain variables. So at the end, I designed a questionnaire and then a test paper to try and validate, is this really true? The things that I observed, were they truly present? Yeah. So for example, I'll give you a simple example. When I started, I remember when I started my research, one of the major hospital I went to, one of the first things the doctors told me was, after I showed them my application, they said, we don't have time to sit down and make phone calls to patients. That was something I knew nothing. I didn't know as I was going in, but immediately it became clear about the work environment of a doctor. The second thing I remember I also encountered in the workshops, one old gentleman who stood up and said, Madam, for me, the only thing I know how to do with the phone is to make a call and to end it. Beyond that, I know nothing else. Now, when we brought the second version of the application and we started the training, that old man's statement immediately became visible because we saw how many VHTs or village health teams members couldn't even use the buttons on the phone. And indeed, many of them simply knew how to make a call and to receive a call. And that's it. So I gave out a questionnaire just to ascertain some of those things. And then I also gave a test paper to find out mobile literacy levels of community members. So now those two tools that I used, they are not methods. The questionnaire and the test paper were not methods, they were tools. They are tools which are coming from a positivist research approach, but I used them to ascertain that truly this thing was there. I didn't just hear it from one old man, but several of these community members actually have limited mobile literacy skills. So that was a situation where I combined the two approaches, though my research was leaning more towards the qualitative side. Now, you can also find a research which is leaning more to the quantitative side, but then may pick out a few people just to understand by giving in-depth interviews. Now, in that situation, this is where you find somebody, it says they're using this method to triangulate. Have I answered your question?
Yes, doctor, I've got it now.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the next thing we're going to look at are the research approaches. So the research approach is very much tied to the philosophy. The research approach is basically tied to the philosophy. So we have two approaches, deductive and inductive. Deductive is supports positivism, inductive is used in phenomenology. So in deductive, we start from a theory, design a strategy. And that theory, together with the strategy, help us to answer our research question, or in other cases, what we sometimes refer to as hypothesis. Yeah. There is a developed theory which is used to test a hypothesis. So we start from a theory. Now, why do we start from a theory? Because most of the time when we're dealing with a deductive approach, the thing we're inquiring is quite well known. Okay, it's quite well known. Let me start with something that is most basic. If you go to a doctor and you tell them, I'm not feeling well, they'll ask you, what is not okay? What symptoms are you experiencing? And somebody would say, I have headache, my joints hurt, I have fever. Now, so automatically the doctor may say, most likely you have either one or two of them. You may have malaria or typhoid. And the doctor will go ahead and say, let us go ahead and do the two tests. Yeah. And when they carry out the tests, they will ascertain whether you have malaria or typhoid. Yeah.
I forgot to come with my headphones.
Sorry, Andrew, could you mute? Thank you. So already that is something well known to the doctors. That is something that is quite well known. So they will know what to do to find out what exactly is the problem. There are certain theories or there are certain things that have already been studied and they can be used as theory. I'll give you an example of one in the field of IS. That is the theory of have you all of you heard about the term theory? Have you heard about term theory?
Yes.
Yes, term in full is the technology. Is it a technology acceptance model? So this model or theory can guide a researcher into predicting if a system is going to be adopted or not, or is going to be accepted or not by its users. And one can carry out the test by testing several things, two things. One is usability and the other is usefulness. And basically saying if a system is perceived to be usable, or rather perceived to be useful, then it will be accepted. And then the other key point, it says if a system is perceived to be usable or can be easily used, then it's going to be accepted. The higher the perception of usefulness and usability, the higher the possibility of being adopted. Okay, so that theory, a researcher can use that theory, and there are other theories. I forget them, but there are quite other theories in the field of IS which look at which try to predict adoption. So that those theories can be used in a positivist approach. Essentially, when you're using the deductive approach is by just the same way as that doctor, the medical doctor would say, you have such and such symptoms, so most likely you have this illness, so let's go ahead and do a test and we confirm by, let's say, existence of malaria parasites or in your system, or bacterial, sometimes even they say antibodies that they find in your blood, that will prove that you have, you may have typhoid. So that is the deductive approach. Then we have the inductive approach. So the inductive approach is normally when we're doing a research about something we know little or nothing about. And it is essentially trying to collect data so you can develop a theory or move towards a theory. It's not that necessarily you're going to build a theory, but you're moving towards a certain understanding, just like the theory of term. Now, I think it is safe to say that all positivists, all theories essentially started from a situation of unknown and coming to the known, where at first you know nothing about something, but as you move, you study more and more about it, a theory is developed out of it. But the inductive approach is that you collect data, derive meaning out of something, and then you begin to formulate relationships and relationships between variables. Yeah. I remember, like I told you when I was doing my research, one of the things that I absolutely had no idea about, or I hadn't read it anywhere, was mobile literacy of rural community members. To actually realize that many people didn't even know how to use a mobile phone. I remember actually one gentleman, when I was discussing it with him, he said that actually for many people in rural areas, I was trying to say that these guys don't even use the contact app on the phone. That means to actually save somebody's number in the phone. They said, no, they just memorize the numbers and they punch them in, that's all. They memorize somebody's number, but a person doesn't even know how to navigate in their phone to go to the contact app and pull out a contact and call that person. So that is the, yeah, but imagine that was, should I say, the beginning for me and for other researchers to get that key point and to understand it in terms of adoption and sustainability of mobile applications in rural areas. So those are the two approaches. Any questions before we go further? No? Yes? Is there any question, or we can move on? Eh? Okay, let's discuss further on deduction. Let's just have a further discussion. Essentially, when you have the deductive approach, you're trying to test if the theory is true or not. Yeah. The theory may say, if this thing happens, then X will occur. You'll test X, and if X does not occur, if X does occur, then that means the theory is true. Yeah. that means the theory is true. If X does not occur, then the theory can be challenged. In IS, we could, for example, take up the term theory and say, let's test it. Let's say we have a failed system, and let's find out if it's a question of usability. Yeah. Then you find out, no, it's actually not the case. Maybe the system failed for other reasons. We looked at, I remember in last week's, the presentations you had, where some of you looked at the failed project with action research, where a collaboration tool was introduced within a certain context, but it didn't bring about the results that were hoped for. Now, somebody can say, maybe it was the tool itself wasn't usable or useful. Another person will say, no, it was most likely is, but other aspects came in. So in such a situation, you can use the theory to test, is it true or not? And maybe even carry out some more in-depth research to find out. Now, with the deductive approach, with theory, we have what we call a hypothesis. Essentially, from the theory, we develop a hypothesis. For example, with the term theory, you're trying to find out a relationship between two concepts, adoption and usability, adoption and usefulness. Is this true or not? So here is another example where one might say we want to find out the relationship, or rather, relationship and gross annual income, or rather age and gross annual income. When someone might say, the older you grow, the higher your income, your income levels raise, your gross annual income raises. And someone may carry out a research to find out if that is true. And they may test the hypothesis and find out yes or no. Now, basically, a deductive approach starts from a theory. From this theory, we develop a hypothesis. Then from the hypothesis, we make observations and we confirm if it really is, the hypothesis is really true. So for example, from a theory, someone may come up with a theory saying people's incomes grow with their age. Then one might say, okay, let's have a hypothesis where they say, with increase in age, we have increase in income. And then the person decides to go out and make an inquiry. And in that inquiry, they're trying to test if it really is true, if really that is the situation. And then somebody may hand out a survey to several people and ask them to state their income levels, maybe from the time they started working, maybe gets a group of people who started working maybe in their 20s and who now may be at the age of 50 or 60, and try to find out within that age group if really that is the case, and they confirm or disprove that situation. Yes, please. Any question?
Yeah. Before we go any further.
Yes.
I just want clarity on this. Okay, I have a clue, but I just can't take it for granted.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm actually helping somebody. So what is a distinct difference between a hypothesis and a thesis?
A hypothesis and a thesis. Okay. Now, a hypothesis, if you look at this, a hypothesis is stating the relationship between two concepts. For example, I gave you the example which comes from TAM, which says adoption, a system will be adopted, there will be adoption if there's usability. Adoption is going to be positive if there's usability. That is a statement. That's a hypothesis. It is stating a relationship. And at the end of it, you must prove or disprove that statement. Your findings will tell you whether that statement is true or false. The thesis, on the other hand, is the entire book you've written, of the entire research you've written. So the thesis itself is the book that comes out from the research you've done. All the chapters of your research. That is the collection of the chapters for your research. That is the thesis. So the hypothesis is a statement. The thesis is the book containing all your chapters for your work, or rather, that is the dissertation itself. Have I answered your question?
This is what I thought. Actually, I thought so, but according to my dictionary, actually, it's the dictionary that drove me to asking this question, because I got a little confused. So when you type in thesis, it will say an unapproved statement. And then on the other hand, it actually talks about your entire proposal for the hypothesis. But you had explained it the other way.
The thesis, eh?
Yeah. Now, according to this, a thesis is just a statement.
The hypothesis.
No, a thesis.
But, okay.
According to the dictionary.
Okay. Here I'm saying something here. It says a thesis statement should show exactly what your paper will be about, and will help you keep your paper to a manageable topic. For example, if you're writing a 7 to 10 page paper on hunger, you may say, world hunger has many causes and effects. But it goes ahead to say this is a weak statement for two major reasons, blah, 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 blah. But yeah. Now, I think here there are two meanings to it. There is the thesis being a statement, but there's also being a dissertation. There's also one here which says a dissertation embodying results of original research and especially substantiating a specific view. That's the first definition that comes. If you're just Googling, it says the first definition says full definition of thesis: a dissertation embodying results of original research and especially substantiating a specific view, especially one written by a candidate for academic degree. 2 is a proposition to be proved or on one advanced without proof. Now, I think in this situation, there are times the word hypothesis may be shortened to someone saying thesis. Yeah? Emmanuel.
I get you now.
Yeah, I think there are times when the word hypothesis may be shortened, but normally we just keep it to the term hypothesis. So, and other times when somebody simply says thesis, they are referring to your dissertation in day-to-day language. For example, if you may go somewhere and someone says, what was your thesis about? They're referring to your dissertation. But the hypothesis itself is that statement showing a relationship between two concepts or variables.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. So we come to induction or building theory. So in this approach, like I'd given a summary before, the inductive approach is the very opposite of the deductive. So in this situation, we are building theory, we're building an understanding. The best way to understand it is to say, we're building an understanding. We don't yet know, but we're beginning to build an understanding. Here we have a sample question. What is the experience of working at a particular firm? Take an example. think about it this way. Someone there may be, should I say, there may be theories that may exist on let's say, law firms. Maybe theories concerning salary scale, theories concerning job risks, or things like that. That you may have a theories, let's say, on workplace accidents, and where they may say, just thinking off top of my head, I'm just thinking about it. If you're working in a factory, there are high risks of you getting an accident. And if there's a theory on site job accidents, that theory may probably show that factory workers are more prone to workplace accidents than corporate organizations. That in itself comes from a deductive side. But if we're talking about experience, about working in a particular place, this is something that is dependent on somebody's personal experience, what somebody goes through daily, why they picked to work in a particular place. We can't, for example, say all lawyers enjoy their work, or let us say all nursery school teachers find their work really joyful, because maybe you can say, because they are surrounded with, paintings and cartoons and so on and so forth. That is not the case. That depends specifically on somebody's feeling at a particular time. Yeah, the job satisfaction one goes through, and that you cannot understand it by being deductive in reasoning. You must sit down and understand what issues somebody goes through. So inductive, we are looking at it coming from a smaller point, a starting point of unknown, and we are trying to build information and understand more. I gave you the example of the research that I did, which looked at the phenomena of a mobile application in a rural context. Now, I came from a point of view of saying we don't really understand the rural context, how it's going to interact with a particular application. And actually, in my research, I argued that there's been a lot of research on IS and organizations, on systems and applications within organizations. And certain things can be theorized, or we can hypothesize them. Yeah. For example, the term theory, which has a hypothesis that a system will be adopted if it's useful and considered usable. But not the case with the rural context. A rural context is quite different. A developing context is quite different. And my argument was, we need to understand this context before we put in an application, or as we put the application, we need to understand what this context is made of. So in that case, I was using an inductive approach. Are we making sense here?
Yes, doctor.
Yes, silence means.
Okay. The inductive approach essentially is saying that human beings interpret their world. They have a conscious and they interpret their world, and there are things that they will interpret that may not be theorized immediately. And these things need to be understood. So essentially, the inductive approach is saying human beings are not unthinking research objects where we can make assumptions about them. We actually need to find out what works and what doesn't work with human beings. What is their feeling towards something? What is it within their context that may allow them to do something or not? I'll give you an example. I come from an academic background. I've worked in a university for over 16 years. And I also had the opportunity before that, before I did my master's, I worked in a purely commercial organization, company. I worked for what was then referred to as an internet service provider. And one of the things I observed is the two groups of people are totally different. For example, when I worked for Africa Online, I don't know if it's still existing now. It might have been phased out, but this was before that era of MTN, UTL. So companies like Africa Online, Infocom, which is now Liquid Telecom, these were the providers of internet to organizations and to individuals. And so it was a purely private company, purely profit-oriented. So I remember at a certain point, while I was in Africa Online, we were using a system which was quite disjointed, should I say. We had the IT department or the technical department, you had the sales department, then you had the accounts department. So if somebody came and received an account from Africa Online or a company, they would start with sales. The salesperson would clinch the deal. Then the salesperson goes to the IT department. The IT department creates the account, they set up. Then the money is taken to the accounts department, finance department, and the client makes payment. The disadvantage with that, because these departments were completely disjointed in system, you could find somebody who had an account created and that person wasn't billed simply because maybe the salesperson was negligent or was essentially fraudulent, maybe pocketed the money for themselves. And the person exists as a client in the company, but is unknown to the finance department. So I remember within a sweep, the head office in Nairobi implements a new system. So this system connected all the three departments, sales, finance, and IT. And the minute the IT person created the account within IT, the system automatically began to bill you, automatically. Now remember when this happened, everyone went with it, nobody argued. We simply accepted this was the new system and we went ahead with it. Now, I also had the same experience at UMU, where I saw a new system being implemented. The thing about academics, you will not come and tell an academic to take a system, to pick up a system, whether you like it or not. That was not the case. I remember when Zivaste was being introduced, and the professors all said no, and I think majority of them to this day have refused to use it, essentially. Most of the deans and so on and so forth essentially said no, we're not going to use it. So you find the stimulus, the thing that, should I say, stimulates one to do things, differs. When you're in a purely commercial environment, private environment, people are motivated by their salary. In another situation, like in an academic situation, it is your, should I say, your academic qualifications that matter. The fact that you are able to think and to philosophize and to make decisions independently. Those are key points and you find the motivating factors are different. So in that sense, one cannot simply bring up a theory. You can't approach the two contexts in the same way. There are different reasonings behind. Now, if somebody sat down and said, let me try to understand why these professors have said no, what is the reasoning behind it? And that narrative becomes quite different. It's not about usability, it's not about efficiency. There are different reasons, that the different stories, should I say, that come out of it. So the inductive approach really comes from a point where you're seeking to understand the experience, the interpretation of the world based on somebody else, not on a theory. Have we understood so far there?
Yeah, I have.
Yes.
Okay. So one of the key points that induction states or emphasizes that the context matters.
Yeah,
Here,
but Dr. Shiba,
yes, please.
so by being, I want to refer to the example just given.
Yeah.
Shouldn't research be about open-mindedness? Does it have to? I mean, I'm imagining by you being enclosed into your academia and not opening up to what the reality is outside. Aren't you limiting your research to what we call a meaningful research? If you're saying that I'm only interested in academia and those things to do with those systems, don't even bring them here. I mean, aren't you compromising then the standards of a meaningful research?
Now, in that situation, the academics are not doing research, the academics are users. So I was giving them as an example as users of the system, not as researchers. So in that situation, a researcher in IS would be trying to understand what is it that would motivate an academic to adopt a system as opposed to somebody in a corporate environment. In this case, the academic is not the researcher, the academic is the user, is a system user. Yeah. So now let us say you are the researcher. Your objective would be to understand, to try and understand what is it that would motivate an academic to adopt a certain system. What would be the motivating factor behind it? The academic has their reasons for adopting a system. The one in the corporate environment is also has their reasons. Yeah, it's quite different from the academic. So the researcher here is not you're not looking at the academic as the researcher, you're looking at the academic as a system user. I don't know if I'm making it clear.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. I think before you continue, I could actually just wrap it with the previous example that we started off with, the mutilation and what.
Yes.
In the event that as a researcher, you are probably, first of all, a woman, and yeah, you're against that practice. Okay, you're. I would actually think I would stay away from that topic because I'm already biased to what I want the outcome to be.
Yes.
But then I'm going to use an example of one of your colleagues who actually says that probably they want it. And honestly, be that during my research, I find out that there are actually some women and young girls who actually advocate for that. And for them, they are saying that has helped me. They can give their reasons, regardless of whether you agree with them or not. But yeah, they are saying, well, for us, that is okay. We feel good with it. So I'm wondering, under what circumstances do you as a researcher stay away? If I'm to join this with the one that I've given you for the lecture, which you are put across. I'm seeing here two ways you are approaching an area that you are already biased about, but then you are actually still going into that. So I'm wondering which kind of research you use to actually overcome your biasness, because people always question.
Yes, actually that is very good. The point you bring about is very important, because research is supposed to be objective, really, really objective. I'll give you an example. One time I attended a workshop for PhD candidates, and there was one of the research candidates. She was presenting her research. I think it was on the issue of land distribution on disputed areas, disputed districts, specifically between Buganda and Bunyoro. So I think there was I'm not very sure of the history of it, but I think there was maybe some land was given to Buganda, and it originally belonged to Bunyoro, and so on and so forth. And her research was in that area. And as she was presenting her work, as she was presenting her proposal, should I say, you could see visibly that she was emotionally affected. I don't know what tribe she was, if she was a Buganda or Bunyoro, but you could tell that she was emotionally attached to this thing. And I remember one of the panelists gently told her that, I think you should change the topic, because it's quite clear that this thing is affecting you emotionally. And that will automatically mean it's going to affect your interpretation of data. So objectivity is important. And I remember in the same panel, also I remember there was an American man, what they call them African Americans. He was also doing research, qualitative research, specifically on culture. And he was trying to trace, I think he was trying to trace something like that civilization began from Africa and from Black Africa. And I remember also at the end of it, they told him that, you know what, I think we don't think your research will be valid. Because one, you're an African American, and that already has its emotional part of it. So this was one of the things they told him. Where especially you see, you will have especially where you see you have a preconceived answer. Genuinely, you have a preconceived answer, then you shouldn't approach that subject. Also, certain subjects are quite controversial. Yeah, they are very, very controversial. If it's going to bring any controversy, don't approach it. Anyone who is doing research, it is best that there is no emotional attachment, research in itself. But however, I also want to state that even if you are an objective observer, there is a chance you might have a subjective influence. Yeah. I'll give you an example. When I was doing the research with the rural community, and somewhere along the way, of course, donors would come in. Now, anyone who has been around the situation of a rural community, very poor rural community, and then the face of a white man or a white woman shows up, the demands automatically start coming in. You can see it. We need bicycles, we need this, we need that, asking the white man, in quotes, for material things. Now, of course, when you're there observing, the back of your mind, you have this biasness. You automatically have, you have a feeling towards it. But as a researcher, you need to push those feelings aside and report what you see. Report what you see and leave it at that. I don't know if I answer your question.
Yes, please. I think you do in a better, because I think that is where sometimes when we come through some reports and we just, I think you've also been into that situation. Have you read the report, an article or something, and just stop at the first first paragraph and throw it aside, and
yes,
I'm not reading this, because you already feel from the introduction, the person who is writing it, and maybe from also the perspective, the media perspective that they already been taking on, you already see that, you know, this one I don't need to read. I know where the story is ending. That is where.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was in that context that I was asking.
Yes.
That.
Yeah. So objective, what Tony points out is really important. Objectivity is very, very important in research. So for example, if I just go back to the two different incidents that I experienced, that I observed in a corporate environment and then in an academic environment, adoption of systems. An objective researcher, an IS researcher might say, they try to find out what are the motivating factors for adoption in an academic environment and an adoption in a corporate environment. If you had more or less similar systems being implemented, and in one context it fails, another context it thrives, what would be the reasoning behind it? I think that is also an area for research. So inductive reasoning, with inductive approach, we normally have qualitative methods. We usually have a small sample size, whereas in inductive reasoning, you normally must have a huge sample size. For example,
Doctor,
yes, please.
Before you actually continue, just if I'm to ask, I'm assuming that, yeah, I know I'm already biased, but just like as Emma was telling us the other day, you've already invested a lot in your project and you can't throw it out despite the biasness. Now, to me, my question is which kind, how do I join, which kind of research methods do I use in this case, or do I combine? Do I use deductive in that case to actually cover up into that, and just cover up the cover that, yes, well, I had a biased opinion, but I try to involve in this concept, this kind of research method, to actually cover for my biasness and bring out the objectivity.
Now here, this is where we shall talk about validity in your research. And this is the validity, and when we talk about validity in research, this is where we are insisting on the scientific side of things, that truly you used the scientific method and you validated your research method and your research tools and your data. We shall talk about that in the research design section. Actually, that information. But anyway, let's first finish this, and we shall talk about that when we talk about research design.
No problem.
Yeah. Now, the graph for inductive research is opposite from the deductive. Where deductive, we started with theory. With inductive, we start with observation. In the observation, this is where we're seeking to understand. We're seeking to understand something here. Once we observe, we develop a pattern, and from that pattern, we propose a hypothesis. And from that proposition, we can come up with theory. Now, let's first of all realistic. Most of us will not come up with a theory from a master's thesis, even from a PhD thesis. It's over long term. Most likely at the end of it, you will have a proposed hypothesis. You have observed pattern and you will propose a tentative hypothesis at the end as you conclude. Built on research built on with time develops theory. That means others reading your work will say, okay, let me test this hypothesis, which will then develop into a theory. Combining approaches. It can be advantageous to combine the approaches, depending on how much it is we are trying to understand. I already gave you the example of my research where it was mostly qualitative, but I introduced a small element of quantitative or deductive reasoning so that I could validate my findings or triangulate. We call it, the technical term is triangulate my findings. Now, you might find there's a hypothesis you want to test, but you may find that you may also have a bit more understanding if together with a survey or a lab experiment, you say, let me follow it up with maybe observation within a certain context just to generate more data. So there are situations where you may decide to combine your methods. Many times you find people do try to combine. They may not even understand it that they're actually combining at a certain point, but you actually do it where you see it may help me a bit more if I also introduce this other approach, especially to triangulate. There are also constraints, should I say, there are also reasons which may help you, or there are advantages that may come in. There be advantages or disadvantages. Surveys are very easy to use, very easy. You design a survey, you distribute or you administer your questionnaire, you get back a response, enter it into a computer, and begin your analysis. So that is quite easy. Yeah, it's not as laborious, and you may collect your data in, let's say, a month's time or 2 months' time. This is unlike quantitative data, which may take a really long time to collect. I gave you the example where I spent 2 years with a community. After the 2 years, I had so many recordings of workshops and focus group discussions, and most of these were in the native language of that community, which was Luganda. And me not being a Muganda, I remember there were some things I had to think about before. I can understand Luganda quite a number of things, but some things I really need to think about them. So it really took time, and of course you get bored as you go through it. So there's that laborious part of it. So when somebody says, let me combine, number one, you are being cautious. You're making your life a little bit easier. In a survey, if you're going purely quantitative, like here, the example gives what happens if your computer crashes. Or what happens if you don't get a high response rate from your questionnaire. I remember one of the PhD candidates I shared an office with. I remember at a certain point, she was a European, and so most of her research was in Europe. And she sent out her questionnaire via email to several organizations. And she said she had a very low response rate, extremely low. And when it is low, essentially you can't make conclusions if your response rate is quite low. Because remember, with quantitative data, you have to have a certain number of responses from your respondents, but her response rate was extremely low. And then she kept saying, what do I do? I've sent out reminder emails and so on and so forth. The advantage would have been, okay, if someone had said, let me support this with interviews, where I decide to, in addition to a questionnaire, I said, let me also have interviews, several interviews, that just in case I don't get enough responses, I can switch my research and say it was mixed method. So that if I don't have a big enough sample size, I can make it up with the qualitative side, where I said, I had some interviews, maybe I went also had some focus group discussions, and that boosts your data, the data you work with to come up with an appropriate conclusion. The inductive side, the qualitative side, like I said, is labor intensive. Yeah, you can have too much data that it becomes a bit too difficult to come out with themes and theories. So for me, when I had the quantitative side to triangulate, it really helped a lot. I remember at a certain point, I really got fed up of reading through transcripts of people's discussions. And at a certain point, I said, I'm going to stop here. I really need to stop because it was too much. But the questionnaire really helped because it affirmed what I'd already found. Like I said, quantitative side, the qualitative side, you may have a very small sample size, but because you've gone very deep, you have a lot of data. So you may not go through everything. At a certain point, you may get tired. So combining the two approaches can help alleviate some of the, number one, risks, especially when you have the quantitative side, and then two, the labor intensive side of the qualitative side. I don't know if I've understood or explained that part okay?
Yeah. I think I get the entire idea of what exactly is how you combine them as well.
Okay. Now I'm guessing the class is tired because there's very little participation. May I suggest that we stop here because it's now 8:36. Can we continue this tomorrow morning?
Okay, doctor, it's fine.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so let me just stop sharing. So we shall continue these lecture slides tomorrow because we have quite a bit there, especially with the research methods. And I wouldn't want us to skip the research methods because they are really the meat. They are also a huge chunk of research. So we can continue this tomorrow and just complete up the introductory part.